with me, Tarun Nangia. Today, we take up the part 4 of our very, very interesting show on Fali Sam Nariman. This is a celebration of his life. We've always maintained that he lived a full life, and it is indeed a life that should be celebrated, discussed, and since he was inspiration to so many people, various facets of his personality have been discussed over the past few days. We have somebody who joins us today, who's one of India's leading commercial lawyers, senior advocate, Darius Habata. Good to see you. And thank you for making time. Knows the family for long, long years. And of course, Mr. Fali Nariman and his whole family. And he will bring in various aspects of Mr. Fali Nariman. Over to you for your comment on the man that was Fali Sam Nariman.
Thanks, Tarun. Good to be with you. And it's a sad day, but a day we knew was inevitable. What a life, Fali Uncle, as I used to always call him. I mean, he was himself till his very end. That, I think, is what he was. And, I was reflecting, and I would say that at least in terms of lawyers that I have personally witnessed, he was probably the greatest and that I will ever see. And I would rate him and Nani Palkhiwala as arguably India's greatest lawyers ever. Of course, everyone has their own point of view, and legitimately so. There are different facets to a lawyer. So no one can really say he was the greatest or she will be the greatest or was the greatest. But, what am I going to live with in the years to come and remember about Fali Uncle? I mean, Fali Uncle and Bapsi Auntie were perhaps my parents' dearest, closest friends. Their relationship goes back a very long way. When Fali Uncle came to Bombay in the late 1940s, I think it was possibly 46, he had no place to stay. He was a refugee from Burma at that time. So he stayed with certain cousins of his who happened to be common cousins of my family as well. And that's how I think my father first got to meet him and got to know him. And then, of course, they were together. They both did law, though Fali was 2 years senior to him. And they became the closest of friends. And they even courted their future wives together. They went off for weekends to my old house in Lonavala, a grand aunt chaperoning them, so that sort of thing. Just a year or two ago, I found some old black and white pictures of those days, so I showed them to Fali Uncle. He was delighted to see them. But, how do I think of the man as the public figure and lawyer? Not the man who once proclaimed in a conference that he had held me as a baby, which was a little embarrassing when you have a full-fledged conference going on. But how will I remember him? I think I was trying to think, since you asked me to speak, I thought of 5 areas, 5 features. I think it's not the only 5. There's so many things about him. He's multifaceted. But I think 5 areas for me, I will always keep with me for the rest of my life. Above all, I think it was his determination to improve himself and to perform well. And he had that till the very end. He never thought he was perfect. He never thought he knew it all. If you worked with him in conference, and I had the good fortune to work with him over the length of my career in various matters, anyone will tell you that he drove his team hard. He drove himself harder. He would prepare a list of dates, or someone would prepare it. He would work on it. Next conference, it would be jettisoned, a new one would start, a new note. Sometimes he would throw away his own work as saying, this is nonsense. And he would start reworking it, and he would work and rework and rework. And I know some lawyers and solicitors, especially from Bombay, were a little impatient about that. But I don't think many of them realized that every time he did that, he was improving the product. He was sharpening it to like a diamond hot ferocity. So that when he delivered that product in court, it was really perfect. He was not a flashy lawyer. He was not the sort of lawyer who in 5 minutes has cracked the case, given you your answer, and you're out in 15 minutes. You're shocked and awed by his brilliance. Nothing like that. He actually evolved his thought process in front of you, and he changed it, and he was willing to be agile about it. I was thinking he reminds me of the great composer Beethoven. If you see Beethoven's musical scores, they're untidy, they're corrected, they're constantly changed, altered, a constant struggle to improve. But ultimately, the product is divine. And that's how I always saw Fali. I was once with him in a matter before the Kerala High Court. We'd done a huge amount of work. And he prepared 3 different lists of dates, one very short one topicalized, and one massive detailed one. And he'd worked and reworked on those. And the matter was not meant to go on. Some affidavit to be filed. Fali, in the flash of a moment, decided on his own that he was going on. And he screamed at me, "Give me the list of dates." So I said, "Which one?" He said, "That one." That's all. Of course, by then I instinctively knew which one he meant, but that one, and that was the one he used, and it worked perfectly. That sort of, but it was really a final product. So that determination, and I think that came from the fact that he was a refugee when he first started. He had no godfather in the profession. He was alone in Bombay, staying with relatives. I remember my grandfather, who was a leading solicitor in those days, came back home one day and said, "My God, I've seen Fali in court. This boy will go far. He's fantastic," when he was just in his early years. So this has been, of course, recounted to me. I wasn't born at that stage. But it was that constant endeavor to improve. He never thought he was perfect or knew it all. I think that's the first thing. The second thing, and I suppose it goes with that, was his abiding humility. He was humble as a person. I remember conferences, he used to have this Nariman suite at the Oberoi in Bombay before it became the Trident. And he would order cake for sometimes in the conference. And then he himself would personally break it into pieces and serve it to everyone, which I thought was really cute, given he was also grappling with major points of law and facts at the same time. He would also listen to anyone in conference, often even to the client. Yes, that's the right point. If the client came up with something. And everyone was allowed to speak. It was very democratic in that sense. And he really got the best out of his whole team. So he was humble. He was humble intellectually. He never thought his point was the only point or his argument was the best one. He was constantly, as I said, jettison his own argument if necessary. He was so well read, but he never showed off about it. So, humility, I think, is a second major factor. The third factor was he was constant and loyal. He was loyal above all to his friends. He never let them down. He fought for them in court. He stood by them right till the end. I saw this with my own parents. I saw this with others. I mean, he always, I think, I'd worked a lot with him, but he still, in his mind, associated me with my father. So sometimes he would normally call me Kambata, but sometimes in conference, you could see a little, he said, Django. And that was my father's name, and everyone else would look bewildered, but I knew what he meant. So, that sort of thing. So many of his dear friends will tell you that. And of course, Babsi auntie as well. She would feed us. She'd make a lovely roasted idlis. All that. I remember once in that same matter in Kerala, we had a free evening. She said, "Come, we must go and see Justice Krishna Iyer." And I was present at this remarkable meeting of 2 great men. Justice Krishna Iyer's office is a very small, humble office in Cochin. The 2 of them sat there and recounted old times. And I was so privileged to be witness to this. Both very humble men, and both had achieved so much in their lifetimes. So constant and loyal to his friends, I think that's so important. And therefore, judges respected him. He was constant and loyal to causes as well. And he never gave up those standards. I know, for example, sometimes when clients had done wrong, they were really more petrified of meeting Fali in conference than they were of the judge, because he would be scathing. He'd tear them apart. So that's the third sort of area. I think it's hard to not factor in his extraordinary courage and independence as another factor. Most people know about his resignation as Additional Solicitor General of India during the emergency. But what people perhaps don't know is that at that time, he was slated to become the Solicitor General. So he didn't just sacrifice his office, he sacrificed a potential higher office. And at that time, you essentially had three law officers in India: the Attorney General, the Solicitor, and the only one additional solicitor. So he was going to move from three to two, and he gave that up. He later refused law ministership, judgeship of the Supreme Court, Attorney Generalship. All that was refused because he wanted to be independent. And that resignation, and again, I don't know whether many people know this, it was a very disturbing and frightening time. People today tend to forget. He actually swore an affidavit and left it with his very close solicitor friend in Bombay, that should anything happen to him, he wanted his side of the story and his version to be on record. And he left it. He returned the brief for the government of Gujarat later on the same way. So his courage, he was truly respected. Even when he criticized judges, in their heart of hearts, they respected him. So that's the fourth factor. Now the fifth, obviously he had a massive intellect. No one can even dispute that. It's not that he had some photographic memory for case law, but he had a great intellect for principles. He instinctively went for the right point. He was able to apply the cases that were given to him brilliantly. His advocacy was, I think, second to none. It certainly inspired me to take up law as a profession. I remember I was in law college doing a bit of mooting, and I was interning with a law firm, and I would make excuses to run off to court to hear him argue the escorts case when it was before the division bench in Bombay. And I'll never forget that. I can still hear that argument. It was relentless, wave after wave. I think that and of course my latest stint at the Harvard Law School inspired me to take up this profession. And he, of course, was kind enough to give me a very generous reference, which helped me to get into the Harvard Law School. I'll always treasure that. I have it. I'll always treasure that. He had this ability to search for the one or two fundamental points in a matter. He was not a laundry list type of lawyer who wanted to argue every stupid point. He said, you've got to search for the heart of the matter. And he would search for it relentlessly in his conferences. You never knew where he was headed. And then finally, he would hit those points. He'd make sure his list of dates was geared to those points. His notes were geared. And I think by eschewing the weaker points, he made his stronger points more focused and more sustainable. He read his judges brilliantly. I think he had the turn of foot of a thoroughbred in court. Fantastic. Sometimes he was completely reorienting his argument to meet the response of a judge. Very agile. And ultimately, I remember in his metallic, piercing voice, he would hit the heart of the matter. I remember a very heavy matter we once did with him. One of the earliest cases for those compulsory acquisitions under the Income Tax Act, Chapter 20C. Virgin territory, no case law. We went into the power of eminent domain. He said, research that law from all over the world. We'd done all of that. It was meant to be a big pitched battle, very respected senior on the other side. And all he did to start with was read the short list of dates. And before that, he had just read the sections of Chapter 20C from the beginning to the end. After he read those sections, there was actually nothing more to be said. And we were before a very strong judge, Justice Verma. And we said, what about the case law? He said, forget it. This is enough. He just read that and it was right. He overwhelmed the other side. And we got through on that. It's not a leading judgment because since we resisted the temptation to cite masses of case law, it's not one of those with all the case law put together. But it's a clear, clean judgment. And that was his great power of advocacy. So I think these are the 5 areas which I will always treasure. He was a wonderful human being. He was a very jolly person as well, He had this habit, which I think he picked up from his senior Kharshedji Baba, because my father used to tell me about it, because he was also Kharshedji's junior. And he did it once with me. We were in the Supreme Court in some matter from Bombay. And the judge said something to the other side which suggested he had picked up one of our points. And suddenly I got this sharp kick under the table. And he started kicking me vigorously, So that was his way of telling him that, oh, we're through, that sort of thing. We had some great times with him. I remember When I was a child, 8, 9 years old, we used to spend New Year's Eve at a common friend's home in Khandala. He was always the toast of the party. Remember, year after that in Mahabaleshwar, the Raceview Hotel, New Year's Eve, he would be in his tweed jacket with a Himachali topi dancing on the floor. Yeah, I remember a remarkable incident. The Bombay Bar Association, years later, when he had come for some matter, and the great H.M. Sirvai was arguing the public premises matter, where I was one of the many counsel assisting Mr. Sirvai. And Ormasji suddenly spoke about his grandchild. And he said, he's such a sweet baby, and I was holding him, and I would put him to sleep by singing, "Wouldn't it be lovely" from My Fair Lady. So we all laughed, etc. And then suddenly the old man burst into that song. And with him, Fali burst into songs. We had these two great titans singing during lunchtime. So, he never took himself seriously. He didn't, he was humble. That was really what I would say about him. And I think all of these qualities together made him such a fine human being and lawyer. What else can I say? There's so many little incidents, but there's possibly no time for them.
I want to know from you that in his lifespan of 95 years, you know him for well over 60, 65 years. Is there any...
I said he helped me as a baby, so he knew me. Yes, I know him for my life, which is now 60.
So what I want to know from you that you said he inspired you to take up law. And when you see that this gentleman, until 3 weeks ago, stood for 1 hour and gave a lecture on constitutional law at the Indian International Center, what does that tell you about the man you knew for so long? Or for that matter, 3 weeks ago, he was standing for 1 hour behind the mic and giving a lecture, not sitting, but standing. But 3 days before he passed away, he was being briefed by a team of 3 lawyers to appear before the Supreme Court. He was getting ready to appear. So what does that tell you about the man who you know for so long?
That tells me that he was never satisfied. Wanted to go on and do better and better. And that probably, as I said, comes from his refugee past. He just wanted to keep on going, to die with his boots on. I think that's a very important quality which young lawyers should really be inspired by. You don't think that because you know case law or you know this or you know the answer immediately in 5 minutes, that makes you a great lawyer. That's helpful, of course. But there's a lot more that goes into making a great lawyer, and Fali uncle showed us that. It was an amalgam of qualities. And this perseverance, this constant striving to do better and better until the last moments of his life, I think was his shining quality. So it tells me what I feel I had already witnessed of the man.
One thing that I want to know from you, and I take the benefit that you know the family so well, how do you see the relation between Fali Nariman? How did they complement each other? What was one good at? What was the other good at? Who used to handle what? Was somebody fond of food? Did he have a taste in wine? Can you tell me those sort of things?
Babsi auntie was a wonderful, large-hearted, warm person. And I think Fali wouldn't have been Fali without Babsi. They made a good team. She gave him the stability and solidity of a home. And at home, she was supreme. There was no question. He might have been a judge, but she was the Chief Justice. So there was no question about that. She traveled a lot, at least in her earlier days, with him on work. So she always came back to Bombay. They had this circle of friends, so they always met. And she would travel with him all over the world. She gave him that backbone. And she gave him that mooring, I think. So she was indispensable. She was a fine cook, as you know. She wrote a lot of cookbooks. He used to take great pride in those. He used to write the foreword to those. And I remember we'd go to house class for a conference, and it became a routine that I would first, while his earlier conference was going on, I would first go downstairs to meet Babsi auntie, and then she'd feed me some act that she'd made. One of her favorites was these small mini roasted idlis. So, and then when I entered the conference, his first question would be, "You met Babsi?" I said, "Yes." So then often after the conference, he'd say, stay back for a drink or dinner or whatever it is, So but I think she was fundamental to him. And I think after her passing, it certainly hit him very hard. We know the story of how he almost broke down in an interview, but it had truly hit him.
So you mean life was different? Life was not the same?
Absolutely not.
I want a future gazing question. Do you think if Fali Nariman would have lived on for a few more years, Mr. Fali Nariman would have also carried on for a few more years, more than 95?
Well, that's difficult to say, but I think they would have given each other energy and confidence. Of course, Fali uncle was fortunate to have family in Delhi. Son Rohington, daughter-in-law Sana, and his two beloved granddaughters, Meena and Khurshi. They really looked after him so well. He was very, very devoted to them. He loved them. They were.
And in fact, Khurshid runs a sculpting studio from his house.
From his house, so there was. I think that really gave him that anchor after Bapsi, particularly. He had all of that.
Tell me about his fondness for Bombay, or Mumbai as you call it now, because he relocated to Delhi in the later years. Do you think the heart of Fali and Bapsi Nariman was in Mumbai? They are original friends from childhood or younger years. What is his association with Mumbai, in your view?
We tend to think of that, but if you actually analyze it, his first 18 or 19 years were in Rangoon. Of course, not 18 or 19 because they had to run away in 42. So therefore, and that's another story in itself, how they trekked and came to India. Maybe his first 14 years, he was about 14 when he came. Then he spent time in Simla. Then he came to what was then Bombay. And from about 46, perhaps, I think 46 or 47, he was in Bombay till he got appointed ASG, which was, I think, in 1972. So that's about 26 years or so. And thereafter, he spent that more time in Delhi. But yeah, I think Bombay did stamp him not only for the wide circle of friends that they had then and they continued throughout their lives to have. They always used to like to meet with their old friends every time they were back. I know that they certainly preferred the hospitals of Bombay. It was a serious illness, they came to Bombay. But I think what Fali uncle carried with him, Supreme Court, was the ethos and the training he'd received at the then Bombay Bar of the 1950s and 60s. It was a very, very strong and powerful bar. It was a struggle to do well because you had some of the finest minds working here, heaps of lawyers, I don't think the modern bars we have today in the country can compare with that bar. But he succeeded in that bar. And I think the practices stayed with him throughout his life. I think that was really what marked him.
One thing I also want to know from you, people attribute two things, that he remained an arguing counsel till his last breath, getting ready to appear in the Supreme Court, his public appearances via lectures, but thirdly, this aspect of his personality, that he renewed himself to be relevant to the times. Fali Nariman was in news till he passed away. He was giving lectures, he was in the public. He never actually really left away the scene. Well into his 90s, he was in the public eye. What do you have to say about that aspect? Was he always like this when you saw him when you were younger, always socially being very active, always leaving a mark on society by, I remember Nani Palkhiwala, as I have read about him, used to be like this, constantly interacting with people, giving lectures. Do you think he carried some of his attributes?
I think he was always an enthusiastic personality, socially, legally, intellectually. So I think that just continues, and that was his character. He couldn't be without some task at hand. Even when he would write letters or he would write even newspaper articles, it was a huge endeavor. How he got his office going, and his faithful Subhash Sharma with him right through, who was a great junior to him and a great assistant and friend to him. Uh, so I know how that whole setup worked. Yeah, you could see that he was always happy to be involved in some project. That kept him going. So the last matter I actually did with him was the matter for His Holiness the Sayyidna on his powers of excommunication and the review petition that had been filed in respect to the 1962 judgment. And ultimately that got referred to be heard with the Sabrimala group of matters. But he really slogged the week or 2 weeks before. I couldn't attend anywhere near all of the conferences. I was just there for one conference, I think. But the way he worked, the way he prepared, and he did it virtually. I was physically in court. And then at the end of it, of course, when it got referred, he told the whole team that now you all will have to carry this on now. So he himself realized that he was nearing the end. But his enthusiasm was infectious, and it was really phenomenal in every matter.
It's been a good recording. Thanks to you, we could get to know so many anecdotes about Fali Nariman. One last parting message word about him and how the world changed when he's not there for you.
It's a fact of life that men and women will come and go. They all leave their mark. And it's what, as they say, dead men live on the lips of living men. And I would add to that on the hearts too of living souls. So it's the type of person you were, the legacy you leave that really marks you out. I find that when someone has just passed away, you treat him almost like an icon. And really the judgment on a person comes 5, 10, 15, 20 years after he passes. But I'm very confident that in Fali Nariman's case, the same judgments we are passing today will remain for 20, 30, 50 years on. I think he is spot in history.
Thank you so much for joining us, sparing your time and sharing these invaluable anecdotes, experiences of life, and your feelings, in a sense, about Fali Nariman and the family. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Tarun. Thank you.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.